So it all started in 2009 when Double Fine released Brutal Legend. And I don't know why, but for whatever stupid reason, they decided to partner with EA to release that game. And I guess that was the only way they could get that game made, because they were the only ones willing to actually greenlight the game and fund the whole operation. But the problem is that the marketing department at EA completely mishandled the advertising for that game. So in the demo that was released and the pre-release material, they made the game look like it was a God of War clone, and that's what sold me on the game because I love God of War, or that version of God of War, the old version of God of War. And so I thought it was going to be something like that, with this cool metal fantasy world. Double Fine's cool. I liked Psychonauts, and I wanted to see what Tim Schafer was up to. So I played the game. The final product wound up not being anything like its marketing at all. So yeah, it wasn't the first or the last time EA had dropped the ball. However, that game was still revolutionary because, it told this story about the history of heavy metal music, and and that's honestly, that game is what made me a fan of metal music, was getting into the lore and the backstory. And for whatever reason, I'm just attracted to stories with intricate, deep, thought-provoking lore. And so the idea that a genre of music could have a history and a story behind it as deep as something like Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, that was revolutionary to me. And so as the years went by, I realized that someone could take that same concept and make a game about the history of hip hop. And it was like, I can't even put it into words. It was just such a natural progression, because you want to talk about deep and intricate backstories. The story of hip hop is fascinating, just as fascinating as heavy metal. VH1 did a documentary series about the origins of metal music, and that was great to watch. And there have been several documentaries about hip hop done in the past. And you're learning about all the major players and the innovations in the genre that led to the creation of the genre, and stuff like that. And a video game centered around that has been on my mind for the better parts of a decade. So most people, I imagine, when they think of hip hop, they only think of it as a musical genre. And it was in the beginning, and it is now, but at a certain point, hip hop was an entire subculture. It was a way of life, for lack of a better term. And within that culture were four separate and distinct and yet related disciplines, which came to be known as the four pillars. The four pillars of hip hop. So you had DJing, you had MCing, you had b-boying, and you had tagging. So it started with DJing. The DJs, they would spin records, and eventually, it started off with disco, strangely enough, but disco was kind of seen as like pop music, and when you're a part of the underground scene, anything popular it's no good. So DJs, they would be on the hunt for records that nobody had heard before. And there were a lot of artists in the funk and soul genres that weren't being played on the radio. And so, it started off, DJs were playing disco at these clubs or in public events outside, like in the park in New York in the 70s. And then eventually DJs came across funk and soul music. And so just like a guitar solo in a rock song, a lot of funk and soul music had what was called the break, which was just the drums isolated, or it was like a drum solo at a certain point in the song. And so you might be familiar with the most sampled drum sample of all time, the Amen break.
1970s New York was characterized by two things: disco music and crime. Over in the Bronx, 16-year-old Jamaican immigrant Clive Campbell wasn't a fan of either. He spent his time spinning funk records at home. It's where he learned to mix one song into another, using 2 turntables and a mixer. So when he played music for other people, the party never stopped. They called Campbell Hercules because he was stacked, probably from carrying all those records around. He adapted it for his stage name, DJ Kool Herc, and put it on the flyer when his sister, Cindy, hosted a block party to raise money to buy school clothes. At the party, Herc tried out something new. Instead of mixing songs together, he looped the instrumental breaks instead, over and over again, and the crowd went wild. To be honest, Herc's trick was one of the greatest musical innovations of the 20th century. It changed how musicians look at technology, inspiring producers to make new songs by sampling old songs. Breakbeat blew up in the clubs, and combined with the emerging arts of emceeing, breakdancing, and graffiti tagging, made New York the birthplace of hip-hop culture.
That's why it's called breakdancing. When I was a kid, I thought it was called breakdancing because if you weren't careful, you would break all your bones. So it's called breakdancing because you're trying to hurt yourself. That's really what I thought. I'm not even kidding. That's really what I thought. And what cemented that belief was in 2002 when I was playing Grand Theft Auto Vice City. If you steal a police car, you hear the radio chatter. And so one of the lines that the dispatcher says when you're driving around, they go, "We got a breakdancer with a broken back." And it's just like a random throwaway line, but I was like, oh yeah, of course a breakdancer broke his back because it's called breakdancing. But no, it's actually called breakdancing because the b-boys would dance to the break of the song. And so the DJ would what's the term? What am I trying to say? He would elongate, exacerbate. Hey, I just did some MCing by accident. Let's talk about MCing. MCing actually started way before. So technically MCing came first, but it wasn't referred to as MCing. It wasn't a part of hip hop culture. It wasn't a thing. Because spoken word has been around for ages. We know that, but like actual rapping, you can date that back to the 40s, like you can actually look it up, like go on YouTube, search for 1940s rap, and you'll find this old clip, and it wasn't called rapping because the term rapping, it refers to like wrapping your fingers on a desk or a table or something. It's like rapid fire. It doesn't derive from the term rapid fire, but it's like, wrapping your fingers. So, to a rhythm. I wish I'd had time to give you a crash course in hip hop history, but just, watch some documentaries. That's what I did. That's how I learned it. That's how I got into it. So if you're curious about this stuff, there are documentarians who can do it much better than I ever could. But anyway, as I was saying, rapping technically came first, but it wasn't acknowledged as being rapping. It was just, kind of like spoken word. It was still kind of seen as like a style of singing, like monotonous singing, I guess. You know what I mean? And so, apparently the DJs, they would either they themselves or they would hire an MC. Most of the time they were volunteers. They really weren't making a lot of money, but DJs, they would make announcements over the intercom, over a microphone to people, kind of like a radio host, at these clubs or these public events, block parties or what have you, and they'd make announcements. And so it got popular for whatever reason to rhyme while you were making these announcements. And, we're just talking about like just random stuff like coming up next or thanks for coming out and things like that. Got music makes you want to shout, blah, blah, blah. Just little catchphrases, little sayings and quips, slogans or whatever. Like it was marketing, and just to hype the crowd up and or to establish their own brand. Real short little blurbs or whatever, but there would be rhymes in there, and so that evolved into the DJ or the MC, the master of ceremonies, whose job it was to get people hyped up and let people know what was coming next. What record was about to play. Like here's a popular hit. You might recognize this one. No, I'm not going to try and rhyme that. Don't even ask me to freestyle right now. You don't pay me enough. But anyway, so emceeing, like the guy who was kind of like directing traffic, that evolved into, those short little quips, those catchphrases. They would be elongated, and and when people discovered how to do that to the beat, people would write poetry and recite it, and that's how MCing was born. As a matter of fact, the term hip hop comes from one of those catchphrases, because it was something that everybody was doing in the clubs. They'd get on the mic and they're trying to hype people up, so they would go, I said a hip, a hop, a hippie to the hippie to hip hop, and that became one of those catchphrases that just became the name of the genre, which eventually became the name of the culture. And also, it's worth noting that when Rapper's Delight came out in 1980, which popularized that saying, actual hip-hop heads thought that was trash because it was technically a disco track. And by 1980, disco was already played out. And also, the whoever that was, I'm not even going to say his name, the person who did that verse in that song, he stole that. Literally stole that entire verse from another MC whose name was Casanova Fly. And he spells that out in the verse. I'm the CASA, the NOVA, the rest is FLY, Casanova Fly, because he stole that from an MC named Casanova Fly. So that was seen as trash back then. That was some cookie cutter, corporatized bullshit attempt to make a buck. However, because of that song, hip hop was thrust into the mainstream. So yeah, it's kind of like it's a double-edged sword, I guess, or I guess there are pros and cons to it. Anyway, that dude's a thief. That's the point. So you had DJing. You had MCing. Within hip hop, DJing came first. MCing, well, I mean, you've had masters of ceremonies for hundreds of years, but hip hop MCing, it evolved from DJing, and then breakdancing fell into that also at some point. So you got DJing, you got MCing, you got b-boying. Those are three pillars. The fourth pillar is graffiti, aka tagging. And you think, like graffiti, that has nothing to do with music. And that's why you have to think of hip hop in terms of it being a culture and not just a genre of music. Because, tagging, there's no musical component to that, but it was still a part of the culture because hip hop was created kind of in the same way that punk rock was, because it was like a form of protest and self-expression created by oppressed people. And that's why hip hop was seen as a counterculture. Now it's popular, right? Now it's universal, but back in the day it was a counterculture. It was underground. These were people that didn't see a way out of their situation, their financial and economical and geographical situation, like they were stuck. And that's why the term ghetto was used. The term ghetto, we know the origins of that word, but we know the current meaning of it. And the reason why is because it's the same thing. The ghettos or the projects, in low income neighborhoods, they were kind of like panopticons. They were like prison colonies, and the crime that you committed that landed you in this prison colony was being born. That in and of itself was the heinous crime that you were guilty of. So just imagine that. Imagine being so hated by the world. What are you going to do in that situation? You lash out. And these kids at that time, they chose to lash out with their music, with the way that they danced, with the way that they spoke, and the way that they wrote. And so, yeah, you can write in a notebook, you could write a journal, or you can get a can of spray paint, take to the streets, right, and let everybody know how you're feeling. And you'll notice that graffiti artists, what's the thing that they tag? What's the one thing that they write the most? Their name, because they want their name to be heard. And then through their art, that's how they express themselves. That's how they get their voice out. That's how they get their message out. And so it was kind of like through osmosis, it just naturally became a part of hip hop culture. To put it another way, you had the musical component, and then graffiti became like the de facto visual component of hip hop. When you look at images of street art, immediately, subconsciously, you can hear the sound of that art, and it's hip hop music. So we've established the 4 pillars: DJing, MCing, b-boying, and tagging. So we got 4 pillars. The 4 pillars of hip hop, the 4 sacred pillars. And I remember at one point I was covering the Legacy of Kain series, and within the lore of the Legacy of Kain, there's of the setting, they have the pillars of Nosgoth, and they're like really important, and so it's like said that like the pillars of Nosgoth are Nosgoth, and at one point in the story, the pillars get defiled, and then the land starts decaying or whatever, and so like as the player, you have to try and restore the pillars to restore peace and prosperity to the land or some shit like that. And so anyway, that was sometime around 2016, 2017, around there. And so I was thinking about this hip hop idea. At one point I was playing Persona 5. I actually imported Persona 5 from Japan and was playing it before anybody else, and was uploading video of it to YouTube and Atlas. They were trying to shut people down, and so I like countered their copyright claim and said no, I'm not taking the videos down, and they were forced to back down. So I was like the only channel on YouTube that had footage of Persona 5 before it released. I didn't really like Persona 5 anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But I did like 3 and 4 when I played those. So, I considered myself a huge Persona fan, and I one of the things that I love about Persona is how funky the music is. Like, it's really upbeat and poppy. And there's some really cool tracks in that series, and so I'm thinking about this idea to do a game about the history of hip hop, and I realize, and what cements the idea as a good one, and what makes me really passionate about it was the realization that the 4 pillars, these 4 disciplines, they're kind of like character classes in an RPG, and that's what landed me on the idea of doing an RPG as opposed to any other kind of game. It was the kind of like the job system or character classes in D&D. The 4 pillars are that. The DJ I haven't figured out, but the way I see it, the DJ is kind of like they're kind of like the team leader or the commander of the crew. So based on the music that they spin on their turntables, that determines what tools are available for the other members of the crew. So you got your DJ, then you got your MC. They're pretty much a wizard, right? But instead of a wand, they use a microphone. They have a magical tome, but of course you don't call it a magical tome. They have a rhyme book. And it was just low hanging fruit. It was like, of course the MC is a spellcaster. And so like with the rhymes that they spit, right? Because you don't actually say rhymes when you rap. You spit them. I don't know if you knew that. So your MC, they're gonna have offensive and defensive spells. So if you've seen the movie 8 Mile, that whole movie is about rap battles, and so all the rhymes that you hear in that movie, they're offensive spells. But you can also, as the MC, you can also cast buff spells to lift up the other members of your crew. And MCs would do this, that they would introduce the other members of their crew, a short line about, maybe where they're from, what their specialty is, what they'll do to you if you anger them, right? So you can think of that as a buff spell. And then let's see, the B-boy is kind of like, they're like the warrior or the fighter or B-girl, the B-girl came way later though. Cause the girls they weren't trying to break dance. And the reason for that was because you had to be very physically strong. And I wonder if styling as a form of breakdancing where it didn't require a whole lot of upper body strength, that might have been seen as the answer to these guys who are doing these crazy moves and, just like flipping around, spinning on their heads and doing one-armed push-ups into a backflip and just all kinds of crazy stuff. So the breakdancer, to use a gender-neutral term, they're a fighter through and through. So you got to see this documentary. It's called Planet B-Boy. And there's a line from that documentary that I'll never forget. Early on, somebody says, a breakdance battle has the exact same energy as a fist fight, but there's no violence. And, they talk about how a lot of angry people would turn to breakdancing because they were able to express that aggression and get out that anger, but nobody got hurt. And that's the beauty of it. So from a video game standpoint, I imagine the breakdancers, they're kind of like the tank, right? They got to hog aggro because the MC, who is DPS, the MC, they're going to do as much damage as they can with the scathing rhymes about the opposing crew. And then you have the tagger, the graffiti artist, who obviously is the equivalent of the rogue or the assassin, the thief. And it's just, again, it's low-hanging fruit. When you see pictures of graffiti artists, they got a hood over their head to obscure their face as much as possible. They might be wearing a respirator, which is kind of like a ninja mask. They do parkour to find heaven spots, to find the best spots in the city where their art's going to be seen. And also that's going to give them street cred with other graffiti artists like, how did he get up on that spot? Like, how'd you even do that? It's like they're obviously ninjas. So to lean into that, the way that I see battles taking place in this game, it's crew versus crew. So you have 4 members of your crew versus another 4 on the rival team. And there's 4 phases of the battle. You got your DJ phase, your MC phase, your breakdancing phase, and your graffiti phase. And so the graffiti artist's job, and there's also another cool documentary you could check out. It's actually it's not a behind the scenes video, but it's like a mini documentary about the game Mark Echo's Getting Up. Contents Under Pressure, one of the worst titles ever made. The game is just called Getting Up, but that's a stupid title, so you have to refer to it by its full name like it's a celebrity. Mark Echo's Getting Up, Contents Under Pressure. Stupid ass title, but whatever. It was a big deal back in the day. Mark Echo funded a documentary about graffiti, and it's a really well done documentary. And so one of the things I remember from that documentary was they interviewed these graffiti artists with their voices and facial features completely obscured, obviously, and they would talk about, part of the culture of being a graffiti artist was stealing paint. Shoplifting your paint from, hardware stores or wherever you could find paint, or stealing it from other artists that you had beef with. And so, again, it all goes back to, ninja shit. So in a battle, the graffiti artist's job isn't just to do graffiti, but of course they could, they would use their spray paint to sabotage or to embarrass the other crew by tagging their equipment or something, and like you would see in like Jet Set Radio, just vandalizing the other crew's property to mess them up somehow, right? But maybe they could steal resources as well. Like they could steal records from the other DJ. They could steal, samples from the DJ sample library. They could steal rhymes from the opposing crew's MC's rhyme book. Just rip a page out of the book so that their MC could use it. And maybe they could steal moves from the opposing crew's breakdancer, and then they could steal paint from the rival tagger, because using paint is a resource, and so you have an opportunity to throw in some resource management into the gameplay, and there haven't been a whole lot of games about rapping. Obviously you have Parappa the Rapper, but no idea how the gameplay for that would work. I was thinking maybe you could do something like the insult mini game that they have in the Monkey Island series, but basically you're just talking about a rhythm game, right? So it's like a turn-based rhythm game. I don't know, no idea, but I mean that's basically it. Just the realization that you have these 4 classes, but then you could talk about subclasses, right? If you wanted to get really deep into it, because like there's different styles of DJ, right? DJs rarely use vinyl anymore. Of course, a lot still do, but most, in terms of hip hop, DJing evolved into producing, and a lot of famous artists started out as producers. For example, easy one, Dr. Dre. Dr. Dre started off as a DJ, and then he learned to produce, and to this day he's known as one of the best in the business. But he started off as a producer, but then he went off on his own and he started emceeing as well. He learned another skill, and that's a testament to his skill and dedication to the craft. I don't want to say it, but it has to be mentioned. Kanye West is another story like that. Started off as a producer who transitioned into emceeing, and he was able to cross pollinate. Puff Daddy, aka P. Diddy. I think he's just known as Diddy now. I've always hated him. He sucks, but He was a producer for the notorious B.I.G. And then when Biggie died, he started rapping terribly. He just nearly ruined the whole genre. Everybody hates hates P. Diddy, man. He sucks.
Oh, swag. Swagged out the game. Oh, Sean Combs.
Will Smith, you can't say his name anymore because of the slap heard around the world. But, I heard there's this one YouTuber who covers hip hop exclusively. And, he talked about like every hip hop head has a top 5. Your top 5 MCs of all time. And so this guy on YouTube, he talked about, how Will Smith deserves to be on more top 5s because of what he did for hip hop. Before Will Smith, apparently, I could be getting this detail wrong, but apparently before Will Smith, the Grammys didn't have a category for hip hop. And so Will Smith is responsible for, legitimizing rap as a genre. And no one had gotten a Grammy Award for hip hop before Will Smith. That's a huge deal. That's a really big deal. And so he's worthy of respect in that regard. But I think the situation is just that the success went to his head and he wasn't able to handle it. And I'm not going to talk about the slap. That's a separate video. But anyway, Will Smith's DJ, who's almost as famous as Will Smith in terms of hip hop, DJ Jazzy Jeff, they worked together for decades. And it used to be, the MC and the DJ, they were inseparable. Like a DJ was nothing without his MC and vice versa. And so, they were like a dynamic duo. I'm pretty sure Will Smith and DJ Jazzy Jeff, they were actually called the dynamic duo. I don't really know. Neither here nor there. Let's move on. But we could talk about a subclass of MCing, which is the duo. A lot of famous duos in hip hop history, and it's such a staple of MCing. I mean, going all the way back to the beginnings with Run DMC. You had Run DMC, they were a duo, and then they had their DJ and they formed Run DMC. But when you talk about Run DMC, you're really only talking about the 2 MCs, Run and DMC. That's literally the name of the group. And then the DJ, Jam Master Jay, is an important figure, but nobody thinks about him when you talk about Run DMC. Not important, right? Other important duos, Kid and Play. Kid and Play is huge. House Party? Are you kidding? Kid and Play, there is no hip hop without Kid and Play. The Kid and Play dance from House Party is one of the most iconic memes. I don't have any other word to describe it besides a meme, but it's one of the most iconic memes of hip hop history and culture. I saw them do the Kid and Play House Party dance on Nickelodeon's 3D Ninja Turtles series fairly recently.
That's what's up. Woo! Get down.
Before that, I saw it in GTA San Andreas. Like it's huge. It's such a important part of hip hop history. Kid and Play, they're legendary. Put some respect on their names.
You are a cornerstone of hip hop. I give you your flowers right now.
And I mirror that back to you.
And we learn from y'all. Yeah. One thing about the 90s era that we salute and we big up our era before us. Like 80s era was a era to be reckoned with, and these two put in fucking work. Big facts.
On site.
So I'm gonna step off their energy. No. You do your thing. I just had to let them know if it wasn't for these guys right here, a lot of people would not be in the game.
My favorite duo, actually, I have 2. Outkast, undeniable as one of the greatest hip hop duos of all time. Before they ruined their own brand with garbage like Hey Ya, but whatever. Before that, Outkast was, anytime Outkast comes on the radio, I hear an Outkast song, one of their good ones. Not Hey Ya. Hey Ya is trash, but Outkast is they're S tier in my book. But above them for me, Method Man and Redman as a duo, Method Man and Redman had this terrible sitcom in the 2000s. That shit was awful. But I tuned in religiously to every episode. It was my favorite show at the time. Anyway, other skills that MCs could learn as part of their skill tree, like beatboxing, right? There's an opportunity to throw some gameplay depth in there in the form of that. You could learn how to beatbox. That's a important. In fact, a lot of hip hop crews back in the day would have a dedicated beatboxer. They would have a guy, and that was his job, was to beatbox. And that whole thing was pioneered by Dougie Fresh. Dougie Fresh created all of the techniques that led to beatboxing. And now there are international competitions held for beatboxing. Breakdancing I could understand. Planet B-Boy, the documentary I told you about a minute ago, that's a documentary about Battle of the Year. And there's a separate documentary that's just called Battle of the Year. I haven't seen that one, but I did see Planet B-Boy. And Planet B-Boy follows all these different crews as they're training and getting ready for Battle of the Year. The big breakdancing tournament held in Germany every year. A brilliant documentary. I can't wait to see it again. I'm hyped up for it now. But anyway, yeah, you got beatboxing. And then another subclass, I guess, would be the hype man. The most famous hype man of all time, obviously, is Flavor Flav of Public Enemy fame. And a lot of people discount the hype man, or they downplay the importance that the hype man plays in a hip-hop group. I'm not going to get into it now, but I can if people are interested. But I think the hype man is a vastly underrated member of a group. Eminem's Rap God, like a 7-minute rhyme-a-thon where he just tries to rhyme as intricately and as quickly as possible. It's like the rap equivalent of thrash metal. How fast can I recite these words? And Tech Nine isn't, also famous for that. It's at a certain point, it's just ridiculous. Eminem will actually perform Rap God live, or he has in the past. I bet he's stopped because I think doing that too much will cause brain hemorrhaging. I don't know, but it's humanly impossible to actually perform Rap God live. You can't do it unless you have the lung capacity of a swimming pool. So what Eminem does when he performs Rap God live, or when I saw a video of him performing it live, he has a hype man on stage with him. And whenever Eminem needs to breathe, the hype man will fill in the blanks. And so, the last word of a verse or a line in the verse, if Eminem needs to inhale, then the hype man will back him up and say that line. But in the process of doing that, it creates a kind of ad-lib. And if you don't know what ad-libbing is, in hip-hop music, it used to be, the way it was done in the past was you would duplicate your voice, or you would do another take on the verse to emphasize certain words in the verse. These days, like with mumble rapping and with trap music, and they just destroying the planet with its audible pollution. I don't know what you want to call it. Ad-libbing is just like random words or interjections in the background. And you can get a feature credit in a song just by doing the ad libs. And, a lot of songs are, advertised like, hey, this song has little hot link or whatever, or fucking little DualShock 3 little analog stick. And that's like a selling point. It's like a back of the box quote. Like this song has oh man, little right click on the what was I talking about? The hype man. That's the purpose, that in a live performance of hip hop music, the hype man, their job is to do the ad libs, which is an extremely important part of MCing and rapping, and you know, it's like it's a staple of hip hop music. And so you need a hype man to do that live, because otherwise you have to do it pre-recorded, and then, you know, but what's the point of doing it live if you're just going to play a tape, you know? So you got to have a hype man. Like I said, hype man, very underrated member of a crew. And so that's, you know, that's a skill. You know, if you think about it in video game terms, the hype man, their job is they're a support character. They're there to lift the MC up and, you know, to hype the crowd up. They perform buff spells. So it's kind of like a, you know, like it's like specializing in healing magic. If you know, your MC has access to offensive and defensive spells, then the hype man is kind of like a cleric, right? Low hanging fruit. You know, this stuff writes itself. Yeah, you know, I mentioned earlier breakdancers. There's two disciplines of breakdancing. You have style and you have power. Power is you know, that's the heavy hitter stuff. It's called power because you got to be really powerful to do it. To do a windmill or a flare, you know, you're just, everything is done on your hands. You got to be really strong to do that kind of stuff. Not buff though. I've seen some breakdancers that were rail thin and doing flares, and I'm like, how are you doing a flare and you weigh $105 soaking wet, and it's all in the tendons. It's not actual muscle that you're training. You're training your tendons. It's the craziest thing, but whatever. But anyway, some people can do power moves. Some people can't. So in response to that, you know, as a way to balance it out, there's style moves. So, you know, styling like popping, locking, and gliding, and, you know, liquid dancing. And there's all these other different styles of dance that are incorporated into breakdancing. And what really matters, I guess, is the kind of music that you do it to. And that's what changes it from any other style of dance into breakdancing, because like I mentioned, it's called breakdancing because you dance to the break of the song. But anyway, so you got two subclasses. You got style and you got power. And, you know, some people, they can, you know, I guess if you think about it, in like if it's a D&D character, you could multi-class. You can put half your points into style, half your points into power. But some characters are going to put all their points into style, or if not all, then most. And then, you know, you might master one or two skills from the other side of the boat. You know a couple power moves just to vary things up. But, you know, yeah, it's you know, a lot of people choose to specialize, if that makes sense. So for further reading or viewing, I guess, 1984 movie by the name of Breakin', which was one of those movies that elevated breakdancing into the mainstream and let people know, like, you know, here's this art form, and inspired people to themselves become breakdancers. And there's all kinds of artifacts like that movie, you know, like a VHS tape of Breakin' from 1984. That would be like a sacred artifact in a game like this. So you could have a collectathon if you wanted. Yeah, so that's kind of a breakdown of how the classes might work. And then the song that spawned all this, you know, like I mentioned, I was playing Persona, thinking about Persona 3 and 4, and I was trying my best to play Persona 5 in Japanese, and you know, I started workshopping this idea, And the first thing that I thought about was, most of the gameplay is going to center around these battles between crews. And so the first thing I did was I worked on that song, which I wound up calling Wild Style, but that is not a good title for it because, or maybe it is, I'm not really sure, but Wild Style is a form of graffiti. And but like I mentioned, if hip hop music is the audio component, then graffiti is the visuals. Yeah, the song is called Wild Style, and that was meant to be the battle theme for this hypothetical game, the Four Pillars. The song should be called the Four Pillars Battle Theme, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, I was trying to create a song that was upbeat and lighthearted, just like the Persona series. I imagine the game being a JRPG because you have these character classes. And remember what I taught you about JRPGs. A JRPG it's a simplified RPG, but you don't want to call it a simplified RPG because then people are really gonna be mad. And there's people right now in Japan that are saying we should stop using the term JRPG because they don't understand. They're piss poor designers that failed upwards, and they don't understand that there is a difference between a Western RPG and a JRPG. And it's a good thing that should be embraced because, again, I'll say it as many times as I have to until I hammer the point home. The point of the JRPG is to simplify the RPG genre so that it could be more accessible and reach a broader audience. How many people on the planet were introduced to RPGs through JRPGs because they were more accessible? And there's nothing wrong with accessibility, especially in this day and age. So because the genre was made more accessible, the barrier to entry was lowered, more people had access to it, and they were able to get into it. And so once they were able to learn the ropes of the genre through RPGs, then they could, take it to the next level with a Western RPG that had more intricate and involved, complicated mechanics. But as it applies to this game idea, the whole point was reaching the widest audience possible, which makes sense given how ubiquitous hip hop music is today, and given how universal it is and how widely accepted it is all across the world, and how it's used for pretty much everything these days. Hip hop as a genre, as a musical genre, hip hop has an ultra wide reach, millions and billions served, right? But very few people know the history and the origins of the genre. And, when you learn about the major players and the pioneers in the genre that led to this culture, this fantasy setting opens up and you start seeing these legends and these gods and these stories that take place within this alternate universe that is hip hop, which is exactly what Tim Schafer was trying to achieve with Brutal Legend. And he succeeded, even though that game wound up being trash because it was marketed properly. And also the shitty-ass real-time strategy mechanics wound up being trash because they had never made an RTS before. What the hell were they thinking? They were trying to gamify the concert experience, which was just a terrible idea. They should have leaned more heavily into the setting and just created a cool action-adventure game. But in trying to represent, he was trying to find a metaphor for a heavy metal concert, and it just made the game not work. And EA were forced to put out, they had to put out a reviewer's guide, and it's bad when you got to do that. But they had to teach people how to review their game, And whenever you have to do that, it means you messed up. So the game overall was a failure, but the world and the concept I still think is brilliant and inspiring, and that's what led to this idea, what I'm calling the four pillars. And again, it's a culture. People don't think of it as a culture; they think of it as a genre of music for the most part, because over time the MC is what became commodified. Like corporate America wanted to exploit that. They were the figures that were the most easily exploited. They were the most, because they were the most marketable. The MCs were the ones who were selling tickets. They were selling records, selling merch, and so the MC kind of became the face of hip hop, and the DJ, which became the producer, they were in the background. Their status was relegated. And as the music evolved, as rapping came more to the forefront, breakdancing became way more niche because the music changed and you couldn't breakdance to the music that was being put out. With the popularity of gangster rap and like the style of beats that Dr. Dre was producing, that Ice-T was rapping to. Ice-T was a very accomplished breakdancer, but he was all style. He had no points in power. But eventually, his rapping style completely changed, and the music changed, and you didn't dance to it the same way. So breakdancing was on the way out. And what's interesting is that breakdancers today, they still dance to old ass music. And so I guess the battle theme, Wild Style, it was my attempt to try and make modern day breakdance music, because no one does it anymore. Everyone still dances to old funk and soul records. It's crazy. But that's what breakdancing is. So you can't breakdance if it's not to the break. And you only hear breaks in that style of music. And then graffiti has been so disconnected from hip hop culture for so many years. And because of that, the four pillars of hip hop, they're fragmented. Like the pillars of Nosgoth, they've been defiled. And so I guess, if a story was going to arise out of this, it would be a quest to reunify the four pillars. Because you have these, let's say maybe you have, to take a page out of Avatar: The Last Airbender's book, you have these four nations that were originally, they were one country, but they split up, because of, I don't know, corporations, obviously, right? Corporate greed split this, these four races. They used to be one, but then they diverged and they started doing their own thing. And so, your crew is on a quest to reunify the four pillars. I mean, that's just the easy solution that I see for a premise for this game's story. But admittedly, as I mentioned, this is not something I would consider a dream game. It's something that I'm passionate about, if that wasn't clear. And I'm excited for the idea. But, to be honest, I feel like anybody could make this game. And honestly, if you're going to make a game about the history of hip hop, if you're going to do anything regarding the history of hip hop, I really feel like, it should be made by somebody from New York, because that's where it started. And, I ain't from there. I ain't never been there. It ain't my story to tell. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I feel like, someone who's going to tell this story, they really have to be part of that culture. When it gets to the part of the story where it comes time to talk about gangster rap and how that started in LA, I can do that. But yeah, when we were talking about the origins of hip hop, you got to be born and raised in New York because it's a matter of respect. You know what I mean? No joke. I could talk about this subject for hours upon hours. So if you want to see a part 2, let me know. And if not, then we'll just move on. So yeah, peace out, yo, home slizzle.